Okay, well, I think let's make a start. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this session, which is part of our Making Global Goals Local Business Roadshow. Next slide, please. My name is Jess, and I'm the Global Goals Programme Manager here at the UN Global Compact Network UK. Joining me today speaking is Steve Kenzie, who's our Executive Director, Claire, our Programme Coordinator, and Louise Scott, who's the Director of Global Sustainability and Climate Change at PwC. She's going to be sharing some of her own experiences getting started with the SDGs. Next slide, please. So to begin our session, Steve is going to give us an introduction to the UN Global Compact and the UK, then exploring the SDGs and their role in the business agenda. As I mentioned, we're going to be hearing from Louise at PwC, who has kindly agreed to join us, before I then share some of the practical tools that you can use to engage with the SDGs. So for the second half of the session, we'll be opening up for questions. So we'll have a bit of an open forum, so you can discuss some of your own concerns, if you've got any questions for our speakers, any kind of challenges that you're having at the moment. At the end, we're going to be handing over to Claire, who will be sharing some of our more upcoming events, programs, and kind of how we can continue the conversation. And then Steve is going to close the session with some final words. So during the first part of the session, when we've got some speakers, we'd be grateful if you could put your microphone on mute, just so we can avoid any background noise. And if you've got any questions, please do go ahead and put them in the chat box. We'll then have some time where we can answer your questions, and we'll also invite you to kind of raise your hand or unmute yourself during the second part of the session so that we can have that conversation. So you'll be able to see on the screen, we're using PowerPoint automatic captions for the webinar. We'll also be sharing the recording and the slides after the event, but if you've got any kind of technical problems during the webinar, if you've got any questions, feel free to private message myself or Claire. So that's all from me, and now I'm going to hand over to Steve.
Thanks, Jess. So I'm going to, as Jess said, just give you a little bit of an introduction into UN Global Compact for those of you that are not already participating in this initiative. We being the Global Compact Network UK, are part of the world's largest responsible business initiative, connecting UK companies and other organizations in a global movement dedicated to driving sustainable growth. Next slide, please. The Global Compact began in 2000, so it's our 20th anniversary this year, when Kofi Annan called for a global compact of shared values between the UN and business. And those values are defined by our 10 principles that have been taken from UN treaties in the areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. So because they come from UN treaties that have been ratified almost universally around the planet, this gives us a rock solid foundation, and a foundation that participating organizations can use as the basis for their own sustainability programs, their supplier codes of conduct, and wherever you operate, these values will be relevant and applicable. So it really is an important contribution. Next slide, please. To support companies that have made that commitment to the 10 principles, the Global Compact head office in New York and the 68 local networks around the world offer an extensive program of activity to support the commitment. Here in the UK, and I should mention, 10,000 companies around the world and another 3,500 non-business organizations participating. Here in the UK, we have three main work streams: business and human rights, climate action, and global goals. We organize well over 30 events per year, addressing key aspects of these issues to support our members. We have working groups that go a little deeper, and we support just more generally your engagement. Next slide. So if you'd like to get involved, it's a simple matter to join, relatively simple. It starts with a letter from your CEO to the UN Secretary General, and he or she needs to commit to three things. Firstly, to operationalize the Global Compact principles in everything that your business is doing. Secondly, to report annually on the progress you're making towards the 10 principles, and thirdly, to support the wider UN development agenda. And that's what's brought us here today. Next slide, please. For now, and until 2030, the wider UN development agenda looks like this. It's the Sustainable Development Goals. It's the plan for the planet that was agreed by every member state of the UN. Passed in 2015, following on from the Millennium Development Goals. They apply to every country around the world. The goals are very closely intertwined, but together, achieving them will bring about the future we want. And we know it's the future we want because the UN did the biggest consultation ever in arriving at this agenda, and then it was agreed unanimously at the UN, which is quite a feat. Next slide, please. And then the next one after that, I'm going to quickly go into why business should care about the SDGs. And this mashup of headlines and images gets at that, potentially in a bit of the risk side. And so starting in the top left, you can see that little lapel pin that the Prime Minister is wearing, and that is the Sustainable Development Goals circle. So while you might not get the impression from public statements that the UK government is actively engaging around the SDGs, they are in fact doing so. They're well aware of this agenda. It is already influencing policy, and we should expect it to do more so going forward. Therefore, it would be imprudent of any company to ignore this agenda and think that it doesn't impact on them. The publication covered there that's sort of overlapping the Prime Minister and Mark Carney is the Voluntary National Review on Progress towards the SDGs that the UK government produced last year. And that's widely available to download, and you can see what their snapshot of progress is from that. The headline with Mark Carney, corporations told to draw up climate rules or have them imposed. He's referring to the TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, but the idea is applicable here. This is the direction in which the world is going. Any notion that engaging around the SDGs was optional is illusory. It may not be mandated by law for now, but there are loads of pressures coming from various quarters creating an expectation that companies are going to engage around this. And the gist of his point there, if companies don't engage voluntarily, it will be turned on them. The coronavirus has made this more difficult, as the next headline shows, but if we skip down to the right corner, the shared responsibility, global solidarity, and buried under the back there in that chart just goes to show, had we made more progress on the goals before the COVID crisis hit, our ability to respond to it would have been greatly improved. It's built into the SDGs, making our societies and our economies more resilient to cope with the kinds of shocks that we're seeing here. Is it a business issue? The headline above that, Uber stripped of their London license due to lack of corporate responsibility. There's job security for me and my team right there, going on for a long time. Any company that thinks these issues are non-financial and that they can just set them off to the side and not give them the same level of attention that a more serious financial issue might deserve, is in for a surprise when these issues become financial very quickly. Nothing gets more financial than losing a license to operate. There's a, strictly speaking, legal license to operate, and then there's the more notional social license to operate. And the Extinction Rebellion image with people taking to the streets really refers more to the latter. The public have spoken. This is the future they want. And there is an expectation from consumers, from regulators, from investors, that companies are going to align with this agenda and start making a real difference. So taken together, the idea of this slide is to just convey that there is a degree of risk to companies that ignore this agenda. Next slide, please. But now there's also tremendous opportunity in it. The Business and Sustainable Development Commission convened shortly after the goals were passed, and they did a robust analysis of the potential impact of engaging around the goals, and found, just by looking at a few of the key sectors that would be affected, potential for US $12 trillion of new business value every year by engaging with this agenda. The opportunities are tremendous for the companies that accept this transformation is going to happen and get out in front and be a part of making it happen. Next slide, please. This is a very pro-business agenda. At a macro level, better educated and more productive workforce is good for business. Economic and political stability is good for business. More fair and just societies, climate resilience, these are all good for business, and this agenda seeks to bring those about. Next slide, please. Also benefits at the micro level. It makes business more attractive for investors and for customers. It improves management of your supply chain. It improves access to public procurement and public investment. That's not just talk. Here in the UK, DFID, while it lasts anyway, has made it a requirement of their major suppliers and grant recipients that they be participants in the UN Global Compact as a proxy for engagement and being a sustainable engagement with the SDGs and being a sustainable business. Possibly the shortest line between engaging on the SDGs and the bottom line of your business is improved competitiveness in hiring. It's proven many times over that the best and the brightest can choose where they want to work, and they want to work in organizations that demonstrate a purpose beyond just profit. And at the moment, the SDGs is probably the best definition of where purpose needs to lie in business. And I've mentioned the social license to operate, and that's back again. Next slide, please. I mentioned, the missed opportunity, I suppose, in not making more progress towards the goals and how that would have left us better prepared. Now, forewarned, we need to catch up. And so Global Compact Network UK, in collaboration with UKSSD, coordinated a letter that we sent to the Prime Minister a couple of weeks ago calling for the UK government to align their recovery strategies with the SDGs. It's not enough that we just make it a green recovery. That's obviously critically important, but we need the balance between social, environmental, and economic that the SDGs bring. And it's the best way that the government can ensure policy coherence and a balanced, well thought out approach. We could avoid some of the missteps, as we've just seen, for example, where the arts and culture have been neglected in the recovery up until this morning, yesterday evening. SDGs bring that holistic view to the future we want that is going to be so important in the recovery. Next slide, please. Maybe last slide? Yes, it is. And so I'm very happy now to hand over to Louise. If there's anything you'd like us to elaborate on further later on in the Q&A, do please either save that up or type it into the chat. Over to you, Louise. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Hi, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Louise Scott. I'm at PwC. I have a small team that helps to coordinate what we have as a global network of professionals who are helping clients on all manner of things to do with sustainability and climate change. So we have about 850 people across the network who are working with clients. And I have been leading the work we've been doing on the SDGs across that network. So I was just going to speak for about 5 minutes, and I was going to cover 3 things. The first is actually what we've been doing in our work across that sustainability network with our clients. Also touch on our approach to our own business. So as well as that network of 850 people who are helping clients with sustainability, we actually have over 250,000 people worldwide within our whole organization. So what we're doing across those. And then I was also asked to think about a few top tips. So those are the 3 things I was going to talk about. So in terms of our work with clients, actually we started in early 2015 working both with the UNGC and also with WBCSD and GRI in the run up to the goals being ratified. And we recognised that actually it was a fantastic sort of mechanism to really engage clients on and with sustainability. So one of the first things we've been trying to do is to help clients understand the business case for why they would want to engage with the goals. And I think there's several reasons that Steve has just touched on. I think a key one is that actually the goals have been described as the closest thing that we have to a world strategy. And so in order for the governments of the world, and basically every single government of the world has signed up to achieve this in their own country. So in order for those governments to achieve the goals, they're going to have to put in place mechanisms. That might be regulations, it might be incentives, it might be taxes, it'll be changes to policy, and all of those will have an impact on the businesses that operate in their countries. So so it's a chance for business to get ahead of the curve, really, with that sort of thing. There's also, as Steve said, a huge opportunity. So huge business opportunity, particularly if you're able to align your strategy with the goals and have a strategy that's aligned with what the government's trying to achieve. And then finally, it's that point about purpose. So a lot of businesses are really seeing the need to have a purpose, and customers expect it, staff expect it in order to retain and recruit talent. You know, it's really, really important to have a purpose, and a purpose that's aligned with sustainability. So we've been doing a lot of work. We've created all sorts of things, sort of pieces of thought leadership to try and help business sort of understand that business case. And we've also created some tools. So one of the first things that people found quite difficult was how to prioritize the goals and think about prioritizing the goals. So we've created a tool that's actually available freely online called the SDG Selector. And that we've taken how all the goals are performing in all the different countries, and have also used data from a survey that we performed with UNGC and GRI and the SDG Compass in the run up to the goals being ratified, as a way of looking at which goals are performing worse in different countries, with the thought that those are the goals you might want to prioritise tackling, because those are the ones where there's more of a problem in the countries you operate in. So the third thing that we've been doing in that sort of network of professionals is we've been doing quite a lot of thought leadership and looking at actually how are companies engaging with the goals. So for the last 3 years, we've done something called the SDG Challenge, and we've looked at company reporting as a guide to, well, what are people saying in their company reports about the SDGs? Are they including them within strategy? What level of detail are they going into? And as a sort of indicator for how seriously they're taking it. So we've a website with all the sort of findings of that. I think that the summary would be sort of could do better. A lot of companies are engaging with the goals, but actually it's a much smaller number that are really including them at any level of sort of detail into their strategy, and a much smaller number that have got really sort of defined targets and indicators that they're measuring performance against. So there's still a lot of work to be done, even though there's much broader recognition and people are talking about the goals a lot in their reporting. So the second thing I wanted to touch on is what we're doing as an organisation ourselves. So we have about 250,000 people across the network. What we've done, many of our territories, and we're actually operated as a network of territory partnerships. So many of our territories have created their own prioritisation, and that they've often done that by thinking about what are the priorities for that country. As I've mentioned, you know, different countries have got different issues. So looking at what the issues are for their country, and also looking at particular skills or particular priorities that they have as a firm. We also have some global ambitions that we've set. So we have a very active corporate responsibility team, and they've been looking at what we can set as global ambitions. And we have a set of ambitions around community engagement, and that's particularly around trying to help entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs, and that particularly goes to SDG 10, the inequalities SDG. And then we also have a lot of commitments that we're making around the environment. So to go 100% renewable energy. We're actually, I think, about to make a commitment on a net zero promise. And we've a number of other ones, like offsetting all of our travel, and that's one of our biggest impacts. And the final thing that we can do as our own organisation is use some of the power of our brand to help in that sort of lobbying and awareness raising. So one thing we did quite recently that, if any of you haven't seen, would be a really good watch is we worked with the WWF and the makers of the Our Planet series and a number of other organisations, and they've created a 38-minute version and actually also a 5-minute version of the Our Planet, called Our Planet, Our Business, and that particularly helps people think about the impact or the reliance that business has on a stable environment, and actually the impact that we're having on society and on the environment, and why it's critical for us to solve all the issues, and the SDGs are the overarching framework for all of those issues that we need to solve. So finally, I was just going to give you a few top tips if you're sort of thinking about starting a journey with engaging on the SDGs or engaging your company. I think one of the first things is about creating engagement, create buy-in and awareness across the whole organisation. Really important to have some tone from the top, but also really important for people to really understand the issues. And one thing we found is the more that we've communicated on the issues, the more people really understand how critical those issues are and how they really want to help to solve them. Second thing is that we find, actually, when we're trying to make the case to engage with the goals, there's a sort of flip side of opportunity and risk. And actually, I think for business to really sort of get excited about something, it really helps to think about the opportunity. There's that $12 trillion that the Business and Sustainable Development Commission estimated. Lots of opportunities for those companies that can come up with the solutions that will help to solve and address some of these challenges. I think at the same time as thinking about opportunities, though, you mustn't forget that you could possibly be having a negative impact, and actually to be thinking about across your organisation, where might you be having an impact that isn't positive? What could you do to address that and change that? And then the final thing is to really make it core to strategy. And I think there's a lot of agreement that if we are to have the change at scale that we really need to solve the goals, it's critical that companies are embedding it into their core strategy and sort of changing their direction so that their products and services are really helping to address the SDGs. So making it part of core strategy rather than it being something that's quite small in the sort of CR department is really key. And thinking about it across your whole organisation, so not just your own operations, but also upstream, downstream, in your supply chain. What happens to your products once they've sort of left your operation, but how do consumers use them, and then how do they dispose of them at the end of life? So across that whole value chain, to be thinking about it. So I'll stop there because I've probably gone over 5 minutes, sorry, but happy to take questions later on. Thank you.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing, Louise. And yeah, like she said, if you've got any questions for Louise, please do start putting them into the chat box and we can get to them. So yeah, I'm just going to discuss a few of the kind of practical tools that you can use from today. They're all free and they're all online, which can help you at wherever kind of stage you're at with your journey. So next slide, please. So the first one is the SDG Compass, and this is an online guide. Like I said, it's free. And it's 5 different steps. So the first one you can see there is all about understanding the SDGs and really kind of getting a good understanding about some of the issues that are involved in them. And then you can see the kind of next 4 steps are in a circle, and the idea is that you can join at whatever stage you're at and kind of carry on in the loop. So the second stage is all about defining priorities, so working out which of those SDGs, I mean there's 17 of them, so which ones of those are going to be your kind of real focus points. And then the next step would be to set goals. So there's lots of practical advice in that guide about how you can set goals. Step 4 is all about integrating, and step 5 is all about reporting and communicating. And the idea then is that once you've kind of done your reporting communication, you can then look back, okay, do we need to redefine some of our priorities? Do we need to start setting goals again? Do we need to be looking at how we can further integrate them into our business? So that's a really fantastic tool. We've done a recorded webinar series which goes into each of those different steps separately, and we'll also send around the link to that guide that you can have a look after the webinar. So that's the first one. The second one that I want to talk about, is the SDG Action Manager. So this is a new tool. It was designed in collaboration with B-Lab. And it's a self-assessment tool. So the idea is that you kind of create a company profile on the website, and again, this is free. You log in, and then there's a whole series of questions. So some kind of basic broad questions about your company, and then it will go into each of the individual SDGs and ask you a bank of questions. And the idea of this tool is really, and Louise kind of touched on this, is really so that you can get an idea about what some of your strengths are, but also what some of your risk areas are, what some of the areas that perhaps you need to be focusing on to kind of improve those. And it's a really fantastic tool. So there's an option once you've kind of created your company profile, is that you can invite your colleagues to collaborate, and they can all join in on the same page, and they can start answering the questions which are perhaps relevant to them. So if you've got somebody that's working in procurement, they can answer the questions about SDG 12. If you've got somebody working in HR, they might be able to answer the questions better about gender equality and so on. And there's options on that tool that you can set goals within the platform. You can track the progress against them. There's even some kind of benchmarks and more guides on there. So really fantastic one, another one that I would recommend that you try out. And if you go on to the next slide, please. The third one that I want to mention is called the Blueprint for Business Leadership on the SDGs. So this is designed, I suppose, if you're perhaps already looking or you've already got an idea about which ones are going to be your focus areas. This really helps you to kind of go the next level. And as you can see there, I've pulled a few different screen grabs from the website. There's 5 different leadership qualities, and for each SDG, I've picked out screen grabs there from gender equality. It will ask you some questions that can really help you start to kind of critically question what you're doing, and look at ways that you can really raise your level of ambition. So you can see there on the bottom left, there's some number of business actions. So it will give you some example business actions towards that particular SDG. So I picked out just 3 there for gender equality, and within that you can see there's a little plus sign on the bottom. You can go into those business actions, and it will tell you kind of what leadership qualities that satisfies. It'll give you some examples of activities or initiatives that other businesses are doing, and it will also tell you how that achieving that business action or even achieving that goal is then linked with the other goals. And I think that's a really, really useful tool. It's really good, I mean, if you've already started to map your activities, or if you just want to get a much better kind of broader understanding of the individual goals, then I would definitely recommend having a look at that. So like I said, all of these tools are free and they're online, and we will send out links to them afterwards. That's all I want to say for now. So we're going to open the floor to you. If you'd like to put your questions in chat, if you'd like to raise your hand or even just go ahead and unmute yourself, please do. And we've got, just about 20 minutes or so for your questions.
I'm going to use my privileged position then to start off and maybe ask some questions of you, Louise, if you don't mind. I have a few things that I'm interested in. I guess there's a bit of a theme running through this, but one of the things that I think, what I hear most companies find difficult is just confronted with 17 goals, 169 targets. It's just a bit overwhelming, and the difficulty in internally prioritizing and getting it down to a manageable agenda, that sort of company level agenda. And I think one area where that really might be an issue is on climate. So before maybe talking more generally, I think a lot of stretched sustainability departments might be thinking they have, there's climate change to address, there's Black Lives Matter and diversity and inclusion, and there's waste and water and so many topics. With regard to climate change, do you see it as something addressed effectively as climate change, or maybe as Goal 13? And how do you see that relationship between working on climate and SDGs?
And actually, it's quite interesting because it's probably both SDG 13 and SDG 7 that are the two that are the most connected to climate. I think climate is a particularly pressing issue right now. I think there's a huge recognition and a huge growth and awareness of the trajectory that we're on, and the trajectory that we need to be on in order to sort of halt global warming. So my understanding is that we have already warmed to just over 1 degree above pre-industrial levels, and in order to keep that at 1.5 degrees, and the reason for the 1.5 degree goal is that above that is where the scientists say it would be dangerous for us. In order to keep it below 1.5 degrees, we need to halve the level of emissions by 2030 and have them as net zero by 2050. So that's actually in less than 10 years we need to have halved our carbon emissions, and I think that is where you're seeing, I think already since September, 230 something big global companies have made net zero commitments, and a net zero commitment is actually much broader than a CR department. It's really a transformation of the whole organization in terms of energy. For many people, a huge impact is energy. But there's lots of other impacts in their own operations and all the way down their supply chain that they need to understand. So I think climate is, if you don't achieve the climate goal, it makes all the other goals really hard to achieve. And actually, I think the understanding is how interlinked all of the goals are, and things like climate, things like actually the disruption that we're seeing from COVID. They actually have a disproportionately bigger impact on those people that are in poverty. So as climate, as there are extreme weather events and things like that, I think that pushes more people back into extreme poverty. So goal 13 is absolutely critical to solve. In terms of making the goals a bit more digestible, you could look at it as three overarching principles. So it's the social, it's the environmental, and it's the economic. And actually, what we have to have is a system where those three things act together, and we don't have economic. So I think the economics of the 70s was shareholder value at the expense of anything else, and we didn't really understand that there was such a negative impact in all kinds of ways, but now we do. So we have to change that so that we aren't producing and operating in a way that is having a bad impact socially, whether that be on disadvantaged people, on people of different colours, and people in different countries, but also that we're not having a bad impact on the environment, be it climate, be it pollution, be it lots of other things. So I think climate's critical, and actually it's three broad categories, I suppose, of issues that you could look at it that way.
Yeah, I think to that point about shareholder value, I think a growing understanding that long-term shareholder value is going to come from a more balanced approach, and recognizing that ignoring social and environmental impacts for too long may well, as we saw in my slide there, undermine, as it did with Uber and with so many other examples.
Yeah, I think there's all sorts of examples of studies that have been done that have looked at earnings per share of companies that have taken more of a long-term view, of private equity portfolios that are more focused on ESG than others, and there's definitely evidence that all of that has a much more positive impact on performance by taking a much more it's a definite positive impact approach to ESG.
So maybe circling back to that defining priorities bit. So I mean, it's the second step in the compass. Is that does that resonate in terms of the work you do with clients as far as introducing them? Is that sort of mapping value chain to the SDG targets, and is that?
Yeah,
have you got a better way of defining priorities, or is that sort of the where to start with it?
Well, I think particularly a couple of years ago when the goals were first published, a lot of people were wrestling with what seemed like, you know, quite a complicated landscape, and where did they start and where should they prioritize? And that's where we did some research to think about, well, actually, why don't we understand, particularly if it's a multinational, and maybe, you know, about, particularly for a multinational, understanding the sort of different landscape in the different countries you're operating in, to understand, well, which are the goals that are you know, most in need of addressing where you're operating, because that will both be an opportunity because you can help to address an issue that the government is really going to need to address, but it's also a risk. You know, if you're operating somewhere where there's a particularly bad situation, say for water, and you're relying heavily on water, then that's a risk that is going to affect your business in the longer term. So I think thinking about how to prioritize and which goals to prioritize was definitely something that people have been very focused on. I think we have a lot of people wanting to understand sort of impact, and actually what is their impact in their own operations and in their supply chain, and then thinking about how they, you know, if there's negative impact, how they might look at addressing that and minimizing it. So there's, you know, there's a risk and opportunity. I think there's both a risk and opportunity lens to look at.
Yeah. We have a question.
We do.
From Samer. We were off track delivering the SDGs before COVID and are now further off track. How do we go back on track? Have you got a view? What should we do next? I don't think another letter to the PM is likely to move him.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting actually is that there's a huge there seems to be a huge pickup in businesses who are making commitments to rebuild better and rebuild green. There was an alliance launched a month or 6 weeks ago in the EU Parliament that was, I think, about 80 MEPs, together with a whole load of business leaders from Danone, E.ON, IKEA, quite a few other sort of household names, that were all basically making a commitment to build back green and to build back better. And I think actually one thing that has really surprised people is how quickly and how massively things have been disrupted, and how fragile supply chains are. And I think people are rethinking, you know, rethinking slightly global supply chains, rethinking resilience, and what does really resilience mean, and in rebuilding, are rethinking how they do that, and sustainability, net zero, that it's all really, I think, a massive topic of boardroom discussion.
The headlines this week about Leicester and how the COVID-19 has kicked off again in such a bad way there, and pointing at some of the illegal labor practices that city is unfortunately renowned for, does reinforce that idea, doesn't it, that there is a business case for doing the right thing, and they might have thought opening too soon was going to be the most profitable undertaking, but if they're closed down again, or if the workforce are sick and dying, not a winning proposition at all.
But I think
also from,
sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say there's a huge brand. You know, the first thing I did, I read the Sunday Times and went and spoke to my teenage daughters and said, look at all these brand names. I don't want you buying from any of them. And if lots of other people do the same, which I suspect they might, then, you know, that's, I think one thing we have now is transparency, you know, with social media and, you know, people don't get away with things for very long, and as soon as something comes out, it comes out massively, and it can have a huge impact on brand and reputation.
Another aspect of the crisis that I think is maybe hopeful is, prior to this, the scale of transformation that we've been calling for to bring about the SDGs was almost inconceivable. And since the crisis, we've seen, oh, well, in fact, if we have to transform, look at that. We just did it in a matter of weeks. We completely transformed, transportation, food, retail. I mean, not always in good ways, but certainly, just for example, the shifting online and eliminating business travel. Well, that was something that would have been thought impossible. So many people, and myself included, just would have thought you have to be face-to-face sometimes to get business done. And we've seen, and certainly for us as a UK network, we're completely rethinking our approach to how we're going to engage members. And we found, in fact, by moving online, we've been more inclusive, and I mean, today we're honored to have people I've seen join the call from as far away as India. But even just from a more UK network perspective, we've got members scattered all across this island, and when our face-to-face meetings are always in London, it puts them at a disadvantage. And since we've started doing more of our programming online, we're seeing those members from the regions more actively engaged, and a very positive thing. So that's also the trick, isn't it? Locking in some of these positive changes, some of the pop-up bike lanes that have appeared in London. Can we move those, make those plastic barriers into concrete ones, and keep those bike lanes? Would be very nice.
There's an interesting question in the chat from Rachel. And Louise or Steve, either of you welcome to kind of take this one. The question is, how soon do you think we will see new regulation in line with the goals in the UK, or will this be down to businesses to drive change?
Louise, this reminds me of a session that we held at which you were quite outspoken. We had a meeting of our Global Goals Working Group, and we invited representatives from the Cabinet Office, BEIS, and DEFRA, if I am not mistaken. And it was a bit ridiculous. They were, business was saying, we need a push from government. We need you to demonstrate that the government is committed to this. And they came back and said, well, we were waiting for a push from business to say that you were up for this and willing to follow this path. And we had this ridiculous sort of Mexican standoff with both sides waiting for the other to move. And I think we've seen now that businesses are moving, and they are putting more pressure. And correct me if you've got a different understanding, Louise, but what we've been told from government is they have a mandate to incorporate the SDG targets into single departmental plans. And so the SDGs are supposed to be in those plans alongside the party manifesto. And I think we would see if we could, they're not the most transparent documents in every case. And we'd probably see that it's imperfect. And one of the problems there is a lack of policy coherence that I referred to earlier, that with each department working on goals in a silo, this is how you get a third runway at Heathrow approved because of not properly looking at all the interconnections. So it's already starting. Whether it's going to take the form necessarily of regulation or anything quite so heavy-handed is possibly further away, but we know there are conversations around public procurement, for example, and how the government might put some conditions on that, as DFID has already done, and perhaps only looking to work with businesses that are also demonstrating a positive social impact or environmental impact. So it's something to watch for, but there's certainly signs that it's coming, maybe just not as rapidly as we'd like. My take.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the UK was, unlucky that we had things like Brexit. So I think that really just dominated so much of the sort of the government machine. I think the process of doing the voluntary national review last year did really make them think about, well, how are they including it in the single departmental plans? There was a lot of focus and push from organisations like UNGC with UK SSD, who's a particular very vocal and coordinates a number of different types of organisation. The UK has committed to being net zero by 2050, so I think that's one of the first. They were one of the first countries to do that. So in order to encourage that sort of change in, that transition to a no carbon economy, that is going to involve regulations and incentives. And there's quite a lot of talk that that there might well be sort of green strings attached to some of the recovery funding programs and things that may come out of COVID. So I think that's just sort of speculation at the minute, but it seems, it would seem quite sensible to do that.
There's, I think we've probably got time for one last quick question, which has come from John, who says, we really liked some of the tools that we were talking about. Do we think that we could use these tools when setting up and delivering a major project? Or are there any kind of other tools that you'd recommend for embedding the SDGs in the delivery of projects? And again, Steve or Louise, if either of you wants to take that.
Well, I have a great example of this. There was a big project done, the Tideway project here in the UK, in London. For people not familiar, the Tideway project was basically a giant sewer. Here in London, after heavy rains, we still have a problem where the sewers overflow into the Thames. And the Tideway project is intended to fix that and ensure that sewage goes far, far away. A massive undertaking, and they did a really quite robust exercise of aligning and mapping to the SDGs to demonstrate that it could be a very effective way of managing sustainability at the level of a mega project. Probably not going to have time to look up a link for that to share it, but John, I think we probably have your email, so if we can take a note, we can get that to you. And if anyone else is interested in seeing that, do let us know, and we can maybe if we're sending out a follow-up, we can include a link.
Brilliant, thanks, Steve. And unfortunately, that's probably all the time we've got today for questions. But if you do have anything else that you want to ask us, as Steve said, we're going to be sending some things out afterwards. So do feel free to get in touch. Claire, do you want to tell us about some of the other events that we've got coming up?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Cynthia. So I'll just briefly discuss some of the programs and events we have in the coming months. So next up, we have the Making Global Goals Local Business Goal 3 edition. That's on the 15th of July, and we'll be joined by Dr. Sean Davis. He's the Director of Global Compliance and Sustainability at the Royal Mail. and he'll talk to us about the work that they're doing to advance Goal 3. Then in September, we'll be holding another of these webinars, the Getting Started edition. So please, if you did find it useful, pass it on to any friends or colleagues. And we are going to have more to follow in this series as well. Then in other upcoming events, we are going to be starting a webinar series on Black Lives Matter and business. This is going to be launching in autumn. And the aim of these webinars will be better understand the inequalities and issues that arise from racism and discrimination in the workplace, and to gain some practical tips on active inclusion. So you can find all the information about these events on our website. So I'll just talk a little bit now about our program. So Cynthia, if you can just go to the next slide, thank you. So our programs are only open to our members, but of course, as Steve explained earlier, you can contact us or find information online about how to become a member if you are interested in joining any of these programs. So we have our Young SDG Innovators programs. This is a 10-month program designed for young professionals to equip them with the tools and skills to develop innovative solutions for their company, which advances the SDGs. And then we also have a new program which will be launching in the summer. This is our SDG Ambition program. So this program will support organizations to raise their level of ambition and fully integrate sustainability into business strategy and operations. And hopefully we'll have a lot more information on this quite soon. But if you are interested in this, please do contact us and we can keep you updated. And Cynthia, if you can just go to the final slide. So I also want to invite you to join our Global Goals Exchange program. So this is an online platform for all of our participants who've joined us on our webinars. You get access to resources, you can continue the conversation around the global goals, and I suppose share your own specific issues or questions that you may have. So if you do think you'd find this interesting, you can message me right now with your name and email, or I will be sending a follow-up email where you can fill out a form and join us there. So I will just hand you back to Steve to finish up with a last few words, and that's it.
So I'm muted. Thanks, Claire. Okay, so Global Goals Exchange, basically a forum where you can stay connected with some of the other people that have been participating in our SDG series. And I'm looking at that and not...
No, I think, sorry, Steve, you can go on to the next slide and just say a few finishing words.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
So as I meant to say, this series, we're calling it our roadshow because for the last 3 years before this one, we were hitting the road and visiting cities around the UK to take the message of the SDGs to people that perhaps weren't hearing it as often, and convening meetings where local activists and businesses could come together and address the problem. So I've been seeing, Glocal coming up a lot in the chat, and that's certainly our philosophy around SDGs, making global goals local business. And we think that's absolutely critical to achieving this agenda. And so we've been doing a roadshow. With the lockdown, that had to stop, and we pivoted online, and we've been experimenting with a number of variations on these webinars to try to find the best way to give value and advance the agenda. None of this would be possible without the support of some fantastic sponsors. Impact International, RELX, Aviva, and N Brown Group have all been very generous in helping to make this all happen. So I urge you to think highly of these great organizations. I'd like to thank Louise very much for joining us today and sharing her wisdom. Always a pleasure. Thanks, Jess, Claire, and Cynthia for all the organization. Thank you all for joining us. Looks like still a few of you haven't ticked on a box in the poll, so please do give us your feedback. It's really helpful for us. We'd love to hear from you with more fulsome feedback via email, so do please share any comments or thoughts on how we might have made today's session more valuable to you. And with that, I'm going to say thank you all for attending, and I wish you a great afternoon or evening for those of you to the east of us. Thanks and bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.